Since yesterday, we know the Apple Vision Pro, Apple's very first headset device, will be available on February the 2nd in all Apple stores in the US. More than 1 million iOS and iPadOS apps will work automatically since visionOS leverages existing developer frameworks. In the meanwhile, Apple asked developers on its dedicated developer website not to use terms such as VR or AR. I quote, "Refer to your app as a spatial computing app. Don't describe your app experience as augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality, or mixed reality." End of quote. So, as the device is in reach for everybody to use, at least in the US, it's time to finally answer the question what spatial computing actually is and shed some light on its origins. And for that, I'm happy to welcome one of the leading experts in XR. He has been the co-founder of Keyhole, later known as Google Earth, developed the 3D object generation for Second Life, put the first concept of the HoloLens to life at Microsoft, and led the prototype team of the Apple Vision Pro at Apple. And that's just the short list, and much more should be added. Today, he is the founder and president at Real Reality Prime, an independent consulting service providing world-class expertise in AR and VR. And he's the founder of the XR Guild, a non-profit membership organization dedicated to the ethical development of XR, spatial computing, and the metaverse. Welcome to the Spatial Realities Show, Avi Bar-Zeev.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's really great to have you on the show. And to be honest, there would be so many topics to talk to you about. We have to concentrate on something, and I'm very glad that Apple just dropped that the Apple Vision Pro will be shipped in a couple of weeks. So the pre-ordering of the Apple Vision Pro starts at the 19th of January. Do you have to click one by yourself, or do you get one directly from Apple as some kind of perk, being an essential part of the project from the very beginning?
I keep hoping they'll send me one, but I'm pretty sure I have to buy it. The tradition, I think, inside Apple was that very, very senior leaders, like vice presidents, get a free device whenever they come up with a new phone or something. It just shows up for them. But most of the employees get a discount, and they still have to buy the device with the discount if they're not using it for work. If it's for work, it's free. But I haven't worked there since 2019. That's when I left, and so I'm still friendly with all of them, and I still talk to them. But yeah, I don't think I would qualify necessarily, because if they gave it to me, they'd have to give it to a whole bunch of people too. I think there's a lot of people who helped. I was there early. There wasn't a huge team, but you have to consider everybody who joined later as being worthy of getting one, if that was the policy. But yeah, I'll go buy one. People complain a little bit about $3,500 US, but if you remember back to when the Macintosh came out, it's the equivalent of $5,000 or $6,000 today, right? So if you wanted to get one of those first Macintoshes, you were going to pay that much, and obviously today they're cheaper. But you have to just remember, this is an entire computer you're getting. This is not a peripheral. This is a full-fledged, it's at least as powerful, probably twice as powerful as an iPad, right? Because it's got the M2 chip in there, but it's got this whole other chip. So there's no way that's going to be cheap until it's shrunk down to, the amount of silicon in a watch or an iPhone, right?
Yeah.
And even then it's going to be, you get what you pay for, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to go buy one. My goal will be, whichever one I get is first, is to go try to track down the people I worked with and get them to sign it. That's what I really want, is just to get a sort of keepsake of all the work we all did, not just me, but a lot of us.
Yeah. Do you think there will be the M3 chip already in it? So they said something about the M2. I'm not pretty sure if they actually announced the M2 will be in there. How big are the chances that there will be the M3 in it? That would be a real surprise, right?
Yeah, that would. I think they've said that the M2 chip is in there. I think if you look at the website today, and maybe just in the announcement only, they've, I think, confirmed that it was the M2, if I'm not mistaken. And then in last June, they also talked about the R1 chip, the reality chip that does a lot of the work. That's a chip that you wouldn't find today in a phone or a tablet or a laptop. It's a whole new one. But there's all that extra compute that has to get done So it's a pretty important one. And the M2 is a little more generic. That's your CPU and your GPU and what runs the apps generally. So I'm pretty sure it's an M2. I don't know if any devices yet have come out with the M3 chip. It's MacBook. Obvious that would be the next name in the sequence, the MacBook one. Okay, so yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I have an M1 in the computer I'm using here. So if they have a good trade in, maybe I'll trade up for an M3 laptop soon. But yeah, so far the M1 has been totally fine. What's interesting about that though is this is something I learned. I'm not a hardware person, right? I came up as computer science software, but I pretty much learned that devices are not compressible. Like you could take a tablet and if you could theoretically squish it into the smallest shape, that's the minimum size it would get. Same for a phone, same for a watch. A laptop is, bigger. It's got heat sinks, it's got fans, right? And those things take up space, but the smaller the devices get, the less power they have. And spatial computing still takes a lot of power. It takes a lot of power to do all the work that has to get done. And someday that'll be a lot less. But for today, you can't really make it any smaller without trading off the performance that you need to make it really amazing.
Yeah.
There are devices like that. There are ones that are just peripherals that are headsets only, and maybe they do a little tracking now, but most of the work is done on your phone. And so that limits the level of the experience that you can have, right?
And were these the questions when you started at Apple, when you have been asked, like, what is the next thing? How actually did your work look at Apple in the first place? What were the questions they approached you with?
Yeah, so I can talk about anything that is out in public. And when it comes to specifics, I do have to be a little careful because it's not always clear what they still consider to be secret or non-disclosed. Like I know that the number of people who worked on the project is something they don't want anyone talking about. But I can give you this because it always works the same way when new products are started, is that there's always just a small number of people, a small team whose job it is to figure out the next step. Their job isn't necessarily to figure out the final step. Their job is to figure out the next step. But the next step is usually going from idea to funding. So you can imagine there being a phase where there's, a small number of people, relatively small team, but every discipline is represented. You might have somebody who is there from electrical engineering, and somebody's there from design, and somebody's there from software and applications, and they're all working together very collaboratively to figure out what the new product should be. And they all have input, right? All the issues from battery to heat management to optics, those all have a factor to play, and they're experts in every one of those areas. My job's a little bit different in general, and I've done the same job now at Microsoft and Amazon and Apple. The job is the reason the team is called experience prototyping. It's not hardware prototyping. For hardware, my team would use whatever we could get. So we could use anything off the shelf. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be an Apple product. It could be anything. And we'll occasionally help, with new hardware prototypes as well. But the real point of the team that I led was to try to figure out what are the experiences. What are the most important experiences that this new product has to support? I like to call them the canonical experiences, because if you were going to write a Bible about the product, and a lot of companies do. I mean, and even Disney did. Whenever Disney made movies or Pixar, there'd be a document called the Bible for each movie that would say, here's what color you use, here's what this has to do, here's what the character likes to say. And you do the same thing for products as well. You try to figure out what it needs to do, and just as importantly, what doesn't it need to do, because everything you try to add makes it more complicated. So you want to get down to the set of things that are going to be successful. So my team generally does that kind of work. We will prototype the experiences that we think the device should support. And then the most important thing is not that anyone should take our word for it. They should try it. So we build it as cheaply as we can. It doesn't have to be high fidelity, but it has to be high emotional fidelity. You have to feel something in using this. If you try one of our prototypes and it doesn't move you, then it's not a successful prototype. So it's got to really hit you when you try it, that this is magical, this is amazing. And we've built a whole series of prototypes like that get at the different aspects of the experience. So one of the kinds of prototypes, that we built was co-presence. So it's trying to address the question of, can spatial computing be social, or is it isolating, right? We've seen a lot of VR devices that are very isolating. You put it on, you can't see the world at all. And not only that, but other people can't tell what you're doing. So you're not connected to the people in the room around you. So the very first thing we had to think about in any of these products, including HoloLens and Amazon products, the very first step is, how are we going to bring people together so that this becomes a more social experience and not an isolating one? Because nobody really wants that. So you can imagine, prototypes that are built to address questions like that. What things can we do, in hardware and software that will make sure that it's not isolating, that it is connected? And then there's going to be all sorts of other questions, some technical, like, what does the field of view need to be? So, a team like mine would go build a prototype with an adjustable field of view somehow. I won't say exactly how we would do that, but somehow we can crank up the field of view really wide or make it narrow and find out, what does it need? What are the requirements? What makes a good experience? And then when it comes to devices like input, we would typically do our best to try to show everybody what it would be like, for example, to not have a controller. Is that possible? Other companies have done hand tracking before, but what level of hand tracking? How good does the hand tracking have to be if you were going to try to get rid of the controller entirely and only use your hands and eyes? Also, how good does the eye tracking have to be? Because I think, it's fair to say that, HoloLens came first, and I pushed really hard on HoloLens to have eye tracking because I thought it was going to be important. But the way it was implemented wasn't really good enough to build an entire user interface around eye tracking. So you needed better eye tracking than what the HoloLens had. Even though they tried, it didn't quite hit the mark in terms of being able to get rid of a mouse or get rid of controllers. But the work that Apple did, the people who are super smart in terms of these algorithms, really passed the bar of what you need to do. So hopefully now, once people get to try it, my hope is that everybody will agree that voice, gesture, gaze all together is going to be the next major interface. It's going to be the thing that finally displaces the mouse, which has been around forever, 50 plus years. The mouse has been pretty dominant because it's such a good input device, because it's so simple. You can't mess up. Anybody new to computers can use a one-button mouse. That's probably why it had one button as well, so that people wouldn't get confused between the left and right button. Mm-hmm. It's just got to always work, and it's got to be simple. And I think this GGV thing, gaze, gesture, voice, is the thing that everyone who tries it is going to go, yeah, that's amazing. And even for people who have accessibility concerns, like maybe I can't use my voice, right? Or maybe I can't use my hand. There are fallbacks that work in their place. So you can use voice in place of hand. You can, if you can't do gaze right, there's other ways to do it. So the UX designers that finished the job, we started it, but the UX designers that finished it did a ton of work figuring out what would be the most, ubiquitous and useful and easy and foolproof kind of interface. And I think when you try it, I hope you agree that this is it. That I think we've finally gotten to the formula of succeeding on that front. And that was really, really important to me, because a lot of people have tried before and they've given up. They've given up because it was hard. And now I think this proves that it was the right thing to do. Yeah.
That's very interesting. One thing I was always wondering is who came up with the idea of an outside display on the headset? Was that you? Was it already in your phase? Can you talk about that?
I probably shouldn't get into who added what elements. There was a patent recently published. I can say that's out in public. That there's a patent for the front display that lists a bunch of the people from the design group as the patent authors. And so I remember seeing Johnny Ive's name on there, but a bunch of really important designers. I think fair to say that they pushed hard for that feature. There was a feature that was very important from their point of view, and they pushed really hard. This is one of those features that it's really easy to do it wrong. If you were to say to an engineer, you need to put a front-facing display on, there's a high probability that if you didn't understand it completely, you would come up with something that looks like the Minions, where you have these giant eyeballs out at the front that don't look realistic and don't convey the needed social emotion. So I think, it's pretty easy to see that it's not just the front display. There's some extra magic to it that makes sure that when anybody looks at you, they see your eyes where they should be and not from the side or not pushed out in front. And that turns out to be really critical. If you're going to do a feature like that, you got to do it right, or else it's going to be. You might as well put those googly eyes on the front of the thing if you're going to do it wrong.
Everybody's doing
because
that,
you're just going to. Yeah, everybody does that anyway, right? But they don't really represent your eyes. They just represent that your eyes can't be seen. But this feature that was added, I think, really does give a good impression. I haven't actually used the final device, so I can't say for sure until I try it. But based on what I've seen, it gives a really good impression of what the wearer is doing and are they paying attention to you. That's probably the most important thing to take away from it. Is it's got to convey that positive social gesture of I see you. I see you, I acknowledge you, I value you. If it just has to achieve that, or the opposite of I'm lost in my own fantasy right now. It's okay that sometimes we isolate ourselves, but probably 90% of the time we want to not be isolated, right? And today it's putting on headphones, right? If you got to get work done in an office, you put on the headphones and people know not to bother you. There's a reason for that, and it's not the worst thing in the world to have people focus on their work. But you got to be clear when is when, right? When are you interruptible? When are you available? Versus when are you trying to be social and be welcoming? Anyway, those are human cues, super important. And it's going to be really interesting to see in general how people take to that and how well it works, because it's not an easy problem to solve. It's like I said, the default answer, if you tried it naively, would be you'd look like something out of the Minions movie, and that's just not going to cut it, right?
Absolutely. Now you look like somebody who's trying to do some skiing. That's one thing people say. And as you see, dear listeners and watchers of the video, we could talk about every feature very much in detail with Avi. But there are a lot of podcasts already doing that. So if you want to listen to Avi talking very specifically about everything concerning the Apple Vision Pro or other headsets like the HoloLens, I suggest check out the show notes. I will put some podcasts with Avi there. But in this episode, we try to approach a little bit more the word spatial computing. And maybe you can help us out, Avi. As you have been part of Apple for a couple of years and understand quite a bit about how they work and why they do things. What does Apple actually mean when they say spatial computing? It seems very important to Apple not to use any other word, so much that they even don't mention the word metaverse at all. Not even on the website, not even in the list of words you should not say. So they hate that word so much. What is spatial computing for Apple and how much marketing is that?
That's a good observation that they didn't tell you not to use the word metaverse. But they don't even want to give it any airtime. I think what's interesting about that is they said not to use AR. And so Tim Cook has been using the term AR for the last, 6 or 7 years, right? And so now they're saying don't use the term even AR. I don't speak for them, and I can just sort of try to intuit what the reasoning is. When it comes to the saying Vision Pro, Apple Vision Pro, I think clearly that's marketing, right? That's about branding. You want people to respect the brand as it was defined. So they want you to capitalize Apple, Vision, and Pro, but they want you to lowercase the V in Vision for Vision OS, right? That's just how they want you to say it. And, there's no thought police that's going to come and arrest you if you say it the wrong way. But the context of what you talked about was for submitting your app to the App Store. So there could potentially be a downside of doing it wrong if they reject your app for some reason. I hope they wouldn't just on that, but they would just tell you, hey, we'd really prefer you do it this way. But they have used AR, so that's understandable that people would still want to call it that. I think that the term spatial computing is probably the best term that they could have picked for that. I don't think I had anything to do with it. It's possible I would have used the term, but I don't think I did. I know I definitely used the term co-presence. So co-presence is one of those terms, and this will help answer the question, is co-presence is a scientific term, an academic term that's been around forever. The key definition for co-presence is, first, the definition of presence is feeling like you're actually in the space that you see yourself in. So if you don't have presence, you might be in a VR and not really feel like you're there. It might feel very superficial, like you're not part of that world. So the makers of that will fail to achieve presence. Co-presence is when you feel like you're there with other people. So it feels like the other people in the space with you are real and not, and human practically, not just NPCs like in a game. So I use the term co-presence a lot, and they use the term co-presence a lot. And I think it's great because we should be using the scientific names for things where appropriate, not for marketing, but for just describing things, because those terms are well defined. We generally agree on what they mean. But when you come to terms like the metaverse, or even today, MR, those terms are highly misunderstood. So if I had to guess the reason that they want you to focus on spatial computing, it's that it's actually easy to explain spatial computing to people. It's relatively straightforward what it means. I can explain it in 2 sentences, which maybe I should do now, just to be clear. What does spatial computing actually mean?
That's my next question. So what is spatial computing for you?
Okay, but I think it's almost the same for everybody, unless the only people who are getting this wrong are sort of the newly minted experts who were there's a bunch of people you'll find on LinkedIn who were experts on XR, and then experts on the metaverse, and then experts on AI, and now they're experts on spatial computing. So those people are not the ones that come up with the ideas. They are good at explaining the ideas to other people, but I think a lot of people get confused as to where the ideas come from. I would tell you for a fact that nobody inside the big companies pays any attention to them. The only people who really listen to them are consumers who don't have access to the real experts necessarily. And it's not to say they're all like that, but there's definitely a prominent few who, if you were to screenshot their profiles, their profiles change every year as to what they're expert in. In any event, okay, defining spatial computing. So I think the generally accepted definition of spatial computing is that humans are naturally spatial. We exist in a spatial environment. We interact with the world around us. There's the world within arm's reach, and then there's the world we can see. Both of those things are what you call egocentric. They're very much about us and our place in the world. Spatial computing is essentially trying to get the computer to understand that world that we live in so that we can interact there with the computer. Because everything else up to now has been us trying to adapt to the computer's world. So the mouse, the keyboard, the monitor, those are ways to bring us into the computer's world so the computer can understand us in a really limited way. All the computer knows is how I move my mouse. All the computer knows is what keys did I type or what part of the screen did I touch. That's us going into the computer's world. Spatial computing is adding a few new technologies in order to bring the computer or the intelligence in the computer out into our world, where we're already very spatial. So it's about making it more natural. It's about making it more readily accessible, because the way we think and the way we work is also highly spatial. Not everybody's necessarily good at 3D graphics, but everybody's good to some degree at walking around their own house if they can walk or use a wheelchair or whatever. This is a life skill that most people have. And it's one of those skills that's what you need for spatial computing. You need to know how to move your body. You need to know how to talk. You need to know how to look with your eyes. These are very fundamental, basic things. So it makes the interface much more accessible and easy to use for almost everybody. And spatial computing is that next giant leap in the same way that in 1968 had 3 important demos around that time. One was called the mother of all demos, which is where the mouse, the keyboard, I think keyboards were around before, but the integrated computer keyboard and the 2D windowing systems that we've used since, that's where that stuff started in Douglas Engelbart's lab. And that's what Apple saw when Apple wanted to go design their own graphical system. They saw what was at Xerox PARC. And that's dominated for 50 years. But also in 1968 was the first AR demo, right? And it was a see-through display that Ivan Sutherland and his grad students built. Sometimes improperly called the Sword of Damocles. That was only a part of that system, was the Sword of Damocles, but the overall system was called the Ultimate Display. So that's number 2. AR has been around that long. I don't know if he called it spatial computing, but I can go to the origins of the term later. And then the third thing that happened between then and like the early 70s was what essentially called the Dynabook. It was a design of the first tablet, essentially, the first 2D interaction, which could have been also head-mounted later, but it was thought of more so like, what if we all had these really cool tablets? And I'm sure Some of that work probably inspired Stanley Kubrick in 2001 in terms of how the future was portrayed with really visionary, on the desk on the space station was a flat screen tablet that was 50 years early, but it was pretty cool. All right. So anyway, that's my, I padded the definition, but the core of the definition is this is the first time we really get to bring the computer onto our side of the glass, so that the computer lives in our world instead of us trying to live in the computer's world, and it's going to make things better. That's the most concise definition I can. To give you the origins of the term, back in the 19...
Wait with that. We will come to that soon. I want to give you another definition. Probably everybody who has to write an article about spatial computing or is an expert on LinkedIn is working with, because it's on Wikipedia, and which is Simon Greenwald's definition from 2003. And the quote on Wikipedia is rather confusing, in my opinion. I read it, I didn't understand it, so I tried to find something easier to imagine in his work with the title Spatial Computing, and I will quote it because it's funny. The simplest example may be an auto-flushing toilet that senses the user's movement away to trigger a flush. This is trivial spatial computing, but it qualifies. The space of the system's engagement is a real human space. End of quote. A flushing toilet is rather far away from Apple's from what Apple will ship soon. Do you still agree with the definition?
I don't love that definition. I think that there are terms since that definition that probably are better to describe what he's describing. I think that today we probably call that Internet of Things. If you have smart devices that are aware of what you're doing, of course it's spatial because it knows how you're moving. So the toilet senses that you left the room and it flushes. But it's such a trivial example that I think the better examples of spatial computing are the ones in which the computer is doing some real work for us, where we're actually getting something done, as opposed to flushing the toilet. It's more like, that's a mechanism. That's just a slightly better handle. Mm-hmm. And I would put that in Internet of Things if it was networked. It doesn't even have to be networked, though. You can have automatic toilet flusher that doesn't connect to any network. We just call those devices. I don't think we need to call that.
Maybe in 2003 this was something which was a miracle, but not for the Japanese, of course.
Of course, their toilets are amazing, but so I wouldn't necessarily do that. But when it comes to home automation, I'd say that's getting back to spatial computing. So when you can walk around your house and have the music follow you from room to room, but not play in every room, but just play wherever you are without wearing headphones, that's to me the sort of low bar for spatial computing, because now the computer is doing something that's a little more contextually relevant. I mean, I guess flushing a toilet is, on the nose contextually relevant, right? But it's so narrow. But if the computer is thinking about what you're doing, especially when nowadays music players have gotten better at detecting your intent. So, for example, these devices will go transparent when someone starts talking to me or when I start talking, right? That's a whole new mode. That's much more of spatial computing because it's actually using an awareness of the environment in order to tune the experience that I'm having. So if I'm by myself, I listen to music. If I'm talking to someone else, I probably don't want the music overpowering the conversation. And so it's smart enough to turn that down. It's not perfect yet because that's still a feature that needs some improvement, but it's along the right axis. If in the toilet example, I'll go out on a limb and say, if it was a smart toilet that did a little bit more than flushing, like if it was smart enough to know everybody's routine, if it was smart enough to be, I don't know, more ecologically helpful, in terms of waste and how it worked, like, those are things that could be enhanced. But that would make it a little more. Yeah.
Not everybody needs the same amount of water, for example.
Right. Well,
something like
do
that.
you though? U.S. toilets now have two buttons, one for the small flush, one for the big flush. I don't know if you have that in Germany, but that does save some water if you can do the small flush when that's enough. Anyway, I don't think we want to talk about toilets the whole time, but it is fascinating. The history of hygiene is actually a whole other topic. In terms of spatial computing, though, I think the key is that the computer tries to understand what you're trying to do in general. It tries to know you well enough. And that's where some of the dangers come from, too. We're adding tons of sensors and tons of information collecting and spying on us, it has to be used for the right reasons. If it's being used to, in some ways, take advantage of you, that's going to be a lot worse than anything we've seen, right? Commercials have not been hyper-targeted yet, but at some point we won't even know when ads are happening. And so there's an issue of exploitation that needs serious attention when we have all this data flowing. But in general, spatial computing is there to help. And that's actually one of the reasons I like Apple, is that they've been very good about trying to make sure that your device is your device, right? People can complain about the right to fix or closed ecosystems and things like that are fair topics to discuss. But at the end of the day, the company cares that you have the best product for your needs. And the product is not being used by some unseen third party who's collecting data about you. They're very, very good about that. And I think that's important because the devices are getting more and more sensitive. They have more and more information. And so it's just as an example, on the phone or tablet, you have the health app. And they do everything possible to make sure that your really sensitive health data doesn't leak, that nobody has access to it unless you give them access. And you see a lot of the same thinking going into the Apple Vision Pro as well. They haven't, the things I can talk about, things that they've talked about so far. So things like, well, the eye gaze thing, right? That's important. They've already mentioned that even though the device tracks your eyes, that information is not available to any third parties, and even Apple doesn't keep it. But what an app may do, so they say there's a little app sitting on your table in front of you, and it's supposed to do something when you look at it, like it's a little pop-up frog or something. Whenever you look at it, it goes, hi. That app only gets informed when you're looking at it. It doesn't know what you're doing in the 99% of the time when you're not looking at it. It doesn't get that information. And that's not the way other companies have implemented eye tracking. Apple's doing it more the right way because it's important that nobody can write a little invisible app that collects all your data for them and sends it off to some database. So Apple is doing, I think, a good job in preventing that, but also allowing third parties to use spatial computing as well as they can. There's just some natural limits that you have to add that will make it harder for anybody to be exploitive, I think, at the end of the day. So that's also part of the definition, but it's Apple's, side of the definition. I think back to your question about why not the other terms, I think the short answer is all the other terms are confusing people, right? We had to come up with the term XR because we all got tired of saying AR, VR, MR all the time, because the differences between those things are not important to most people. Nobody really cares about the difference between AR, VR, MR. Honestly, it doesn't matter. In the same way that, when you go see a doctor, you call them doctor. You don't use the terms MD, even though that's the term they'll use. And there's multiple kinds of doctors. There's all these flavors of doctors, but we don't typically use those terms. We use generalist and internist and very high level labels because that's all that matters to us. But the doctors themselves have this jargon. I think AR, VR, XR, MR, those are the industry jargons that everybody else doesn't need to know. And it doesn't matter to them. And especially with this new device, because you're going to see that it has a knob on it, right? It's kind of like the crown on the phone. You can spin it, you can push it. And that knob lets you control the level of immersion in some alternate space. You can be 100% in your room, or you can be almost no percent in your room. But what's interesting, and also what they showed, is that if someone comes up and talks to you, even if you're trying to be immersed, they're going to break through because people are more important. They've prioritized and said, if your child or your boss, if you're at work, looks at you and comes and talks to you, we're going to make sure you're aware of that by popping that person in through the bubble of unreality. Even if you were trying to isolate yourself, you're going to know that. And that's important because that's what, again, makes it less socially isolating, is the fact that we're not disappearing from the world when we wear these things. Any event. So these are some of the good things and things they've talked about. There's probably a few things that they haven't yet talked about that I probably should avoid until they do. But that's, again, back to the prototyping. Our job was not to decide those things, but our job was to provide the options. By prototyping different ways of doing these things, can we give the decision makers, the executives, designers, all the people in charge of what the final product should be, can we give them enough information so that we're all going to make the best decisions? And I think so far it looks like we were successful in that, in that really good decisions were made, right? Overall, not the way everybody will do it. Certainly, some of the competing products will intentionally do things differently, but I think this is overall a good comprehensive set of decisions that is going to result in a good product.
Do you think a voice assistant is already spatial computing?
Yes, to some degree. I think the problem is, just like in the movie Her, I don't know if it had the same title I know they change the titles a lot when they go outside the US, but in the US it was called Her. And the movie changes dramatically in the middle, because initially the AI personal assistant only can read his emails, right? The main character's emails. So she could help him, go through the emails. But then at a certain point, he starts wearing a camera in his pocket. And now she has a camera. And so, she can see things in the world and help him with things. So I think once you add an always on camera to a personal assistant and a microphone, now, yes, that is definitely XR, and it's part of spatial computing. But when it's just, Alexa, play some music, it's not contextual enough, I think, to kind of qualify as spatial at that point. If it was tracking you and understanding what you were trying to do, and if I had set a rule like Alexa, every time I cook, play Flight of the Bumblebees, that would be a little more spatial computing, because it'd have to understand that I was cooking in order to do that right.
So it's almost like the flushing toilet, but not that much.
Yeah, I think you need a little bit more context awareness in order to do that. In order for it to be spatial computing, yeah, but it's close, and it is spatial for sure. I guess what's low on the toilet example again is the computing part. It's spatial because it knows you left the room, but it's not really computing anything, is it? It's not really figuring anything out other than the fact that you left the room. So adding context, and so another good example of spatial computing is headphones. But not any headphones. If you're just using headphones to play music, that's not spatial computing. But if you now turn on head tracking, the headphones are now using your head direction, and they're using the environment in order to noise cancel, and in order to allow you to talk to people. That dimming of the music when someone's talking to you, that's a spatial computing kind of example. But below that, yeah, probably not spatial computing yet. Just head tracking alone is probably not quite enough, but go a little bit more in terms of processing the environment, and yes. And I think someday, not that I know of any company working on this, but I think someday our headphones will have cameras in them too, just so that they can do the head tracking better. It's possible you don't need that. Maybe with the ultra wideband chips you could do head tracking but today we're not there yet. Today the head tracking is only based on inertia. So it only knows that you've turned your head. It doesn't know which way you're looking at the moment, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, maybe the Meta Ray-Ban is a good example for spatial computing too, because they are headphones, but they have also cameras. They don't have displays yet, but there's also an AI built in, and it will be multimodal pretty soon, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the cameras are a much more important addition than the display, because there's lots of things. There's lots of information you can give people in an audio format that you don't need a display for. You can be talking to people. If you're trying to give people directions, how to get somewhere, hearing sounds or talking to people is more effective than having an arrow on the ground. And that's only because, the arrows, it's been done a lot, but when you really put arrows on the ground in a real world situation, the arrows get occluded or not occluded based on what else is in your environment, other people, whatever. So it either looks weird that the arrow is not being included, or if it is being included by people standing in your way, then you can't see the arrow. Either way, not a great way to get around. Some people try to fix that by putting the arrow in the sky so that it's not going to get occluded. So that's slightly better. But honestly, why can't I have a conversation while I'm having navigation at the same time, right? When I drive my car, I've got to ask my family to please don't talk when the navigation is telling me which way to go, because I'll miss it if I'm talking or listening to anything else. But you can imagine spatial computing giving you a much better way to get directions that allows you to have conversations at the same time you're receiving directions. And that could be done with audio. It could be done visually. But agreed that just having a device that has cameras and processing of those cameras in order to change your experience based on what you're looking at, that is the beginning. That's sort of the lowest rungs of spatial computing. Whether Meta is going to call it that or not, I don't know. This may be a war of terms in the sense that maybe only Apple uses spatial computing and maybe only Meta uses MR or metaverse or whatever they want to call it. But just the other day, I was thinking, I posted something on LinkedIn about how I think we shouldn't think of these as verticals, that spatial computing is a vertical and MR is a vertical and metaverse is a vertical. I think these are horizontal layers. It's more like AR, VR, MR are describing the lower level of the system, the way the system works in terms of cameras and sensors and all that. And spatial computing is describing the higher level experience of what do we do with that? What are the actual kinds of experiences we add on top of it, including the cooking and the flushing or whatever else the thing does. I think that's a better way to look at it. So I look at it as more of a layer diagram. And anyway, it's just, if anyone wants to see that, it's on my LinkedIn right now. I'll probably change that before I finish it. It's not quite done yet, but I wanted to get some feedback and see what people thought of that idea.
Yeah, it's a pyramid, if I remember correctly. And
exactly, yeah.
That's one of the questions I also have on the sheet. Talk with you about how we actually should understand all those expressions. That's very interesting, and everybody should look at it. I will link it, even if it's still in beta, because you can actually understand a lot where to put things, actually, how to understand them. Maybe that's a good point to enter the history lesson of this episode. When we first met virtually, it was down in LinkedIn's comment section, which you love so much. If I remember correctly, you have been arguing that all this talk about spatial computing as being new is nonsense or something like that. Do you remember what that was again? I don't recall it, to be honest.
I don't remember the post it could have been a post that I put up that you commented on and I replied, or it could have been someone else's. You're right. I do spend too much time on LinkedIn. I have to cut down on that because it's right now it's my only social network. So I got off of Twitter when I thank Elon Musk for getting me off Twitter. And I do only really I tried using Mastodon. It's just it wasn't happening for me. But so LinkedIn is kind of like the only interaction I get with other. I work at home, so I don't get a lot of interaction. So I tend to write a little too much. But in any event, yeah, spatial computing goes way back. I was in a startup in 1992, and we used that term back then. And I've traced it back even a little bit further, but in a slightly different context. So I found references as going back as far as 1985 to the word spatial computing, but that was more so in the context of geographic information systems, GIS. And they were using the term spatial computing as a synonym for geospatial computing, right? Mm-hmm. They were not worrying so much about you and your immediate environment, which is, I think, today what we would say spatial computing is more about. They were worrying about the world, and the fact that the world is spatial, and doing analyses on the geospatial data. So that's the computing part for them, is number crunching geospatial data. And in 1985, that was pretty new, because you didn't see, maps were still paper maps in 1985. You didn't see a lot of people using computers for maps yet. When I worked on Keyhole that became Google Earth, we were one of the first serious projects that was, a commercial attempt anyway. There've been some academic attempts before, artistic attempts even, which is a whole other topic we can talk about, the art code thing. I'm sure people in Germany have strong feelings about that, but it was really one of the first times we built a really usable map where you could get directions on it, and you could see street labels, and it actually had utility for people, and it was fun. But before that, almost all maps were paper maps, and you would buy these books of maps when you wanted to go anywhere. And anybody born more recently will have never seen that, but it's really the way the world was. Anyway, that's the term spatial computing started in that field. And then in 92, 93, we used it to talk about VR mostly, because there was not much AR going on back then. But for VR, we were building these things like, today it's called a cave environment, which is a projected VR environment that you may not wear any glasses in, like maybe shutter glasses at most for stereo, but you don't necessarily always even need it. Today, we're seeing a resurgence of that technology with how LCD screens have gotten so cheap that you can build an entire room of LCD screens, curved, flat, whatever you want. And they're using it for movie production, like in The Mandalorian. It's becoming incredibly useful again. But we were using projectors back then to do the same thing. And that wasn't good enough for filming a movie against. You would definitely notice that there was a projector shining a movie behind the actor. And you could see movies that were done that way, where the special effects were kind of cheesy. Anyway, it's gotten a lot better. But anyway, we use spatial computing for that. We had built. So I'll give you the whole story in a couple of paragraphs. So it's not too long. So
also say which company that was. World
yes,
Design,
exactly.
Right?
So this was World Design. So this was my first actual job. I had a couple of internships at Bell Labs, but this was my first actual job. I drove across country in the U.S. That's like a week-long journey to join a company with people I had never met, including the CEO, whose name is Bob Jacobson. The company is called World Design, and Bob started that company with a bit of seed money from a computer graphics company called Evans and Sutherland. It was one of the early companies that built flight simulators for the military, for aircraft, that allowed you to train pilots to fly virtually. So Evans and Sutherland had given some money, and then Bob went and hired a bunch of people. The unfortunate thing about the company was we ran out of money really fast. So he got, I think, $350,000 to start. And the hope was that we would get more contracts, that we would get more work. The goal was to design VR, to design both the hardware and software for anybody who needed a VR installation in 1992. Unfortunately, it wasn't that many people who wanted to pay for it in 1992. We tried going to the local hardware store where they sell kitchen appliances, and we're like, hey, look, you can build your entire kitchen in VR before you buy it, and therefore you can do all the design. And they're like, yeah, that's great. How much does it cost? Well, $1 million. So they're like, yeah, we're not going to go on that right now. Architects don't have that kind of money. Nobody had that kind of money. So the company, World Design, ran out of money really fast and laid off everybody. I stayed on, myself, Peter Wong, another guy named Chet Daggett. We stayed on after the massive layoffs, but we stayed on without salary. And so I was basically homeless. I lived in the office because I wasn't getting paid. So I stayed for another 6 months or so. And one interesting thing happened was that we got $30,000 from a casino to go prototype a VR room for them, one of these projected environments. And we built it. We had $30,000 is not a lot. So we had to borrow the computers. We had to rent the projectors. The only thing we could really pay for were the screens. So we built it, and it was really good. Not good enough for the casino to give us any more money, but it was really good. And fortunately for me, I got lucky in that because we had borrowed the computers from this other graphics company called SGI, Silicon Graphics, some of the engineers from SGI visited and wanted to see what we had done with their borrowed equipment, and they really liked it too. And so that one of those guys introduced me to Disney. That's how I got my first, serious job at Disney. I would have never known about the Disney VR project unless we did this failed demo. So I'm glad we did it. The only thing I regret is I wish we still had more of the materials to show people, because it was pretty amazing. The same is true of Disney. We don't have any high quality materials left to show people how cool that was, in 1993 to be able to do this stuff. But in any event, the picture that I sent you is a picture that shows the experience that we built for the casino, which was a virtual hot air balloon ride. You have a little puck and you're controlling your balloon. Not that real balloons have steering, but you could fly anywhere above the Giza Plateau, something like 3000 BC, right? So the pyramids were all new. They were white, glistening stone. Everything looked amazing, and you could fly around this environment. And it was really profound to feel like you could actually time travel and do this stuff. So the picture is from that ride that we made, and it has the word spatial computing on it. And what I don't remember exactly why it has the term spatial computing on it. I just know it does. So either I might have just come up with it and put that on there, or the CEO, Bob Jacobson, came up with it. His memory is that the first time he used it was in an article for a magazine called VR World, which is a very popular magazine at the time. So now I'm asking people to go back and look at go into their attic and find old copies of those magazines and see if they can find what Bob is talking about. It's highly likely that Bob was the one who used it. But he also says that it might have been used at the Human Interface Technology Lab in the early 90s as well. So I've asked Tom Furness as well, who's the lead of that lab, to go back and think if he can find anything there too. Mm-hmm. So my suspicion is that it originated for this use of it, it originated at the HIT Lab in Seattle. But we're looking for the documents now to show it. That picture is the one piece of evidence that I have, because it definitely that picture was definitely made in 93. In any event, the term fell out of favor. People started using words like metaverse and all sorts of other things that I think went on the wrong track. That spatial computing to me still is the right term because it's centered around people. It's centered around us and the space around us. Metaverse is cool and fun, but the metaverse is focused on the map. It's focused on the milieu. It's not as focused on the people as spatial computing is. And again, just to reiterate, AR, VR, XR, those terms are just going to be jargon if they stick around at all. Nobody's going to need to know those terms. It's not that important. And the reason I called this group the XR Guild was because it's an industry term. It's jargon. Nobody that's not working in the field necessarily needs to know what XR exactly is. It's okay.
I will put that picture, if you agree, in the article of the podcast so people can actually see it. I will refer it to you. No idea who has the copyright on it. Probably nobody anymore.
Nobody anymore. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine to use. They put a Creative Commons on it. I think. So at some point we have to go fix that Wikipedia page. It's lacking. So I'm trying to get a few more online references that Wikipedia editors really like there to be something to point to back up whatever you're saying. So I'm trying to get a lot of this evidence to get hosted somewhere online, and then we'll fix the article so that the experts actually have some real expertise to talk about.
That's actually really hard. So this is also what I enjoy with this podcast, to bring people to talk about the history of XR, whatever that meant back then. Because that's just very important to understand what actually has happened already, what we already knew, what's not working. I already tried everything, and that's a very interesting development we have to paint here. So maybe let's go the next step. Spatial computing was 1992 for you, 1993, not 2003 like everybody reads right now in Wikipedia. When did it appear next? I guess at the Linden Lab you were not talking about spatial computing, but more about the movie The Matrix and about the metaverse, right?
Yeah, I don't think Linden Lab was the company that built Second Life. I don't think we were talking about the Matrix as much, because I think one of the key differences with Second Life was nobody in the company wanted it to be your first life. Like nobody had this idea that people are going to forget about reality and spend all their time here. It was meant to be an escape, the place to go when you don't want to be in reality. That's a rich experience that you maintain, but it's always meant to be your alter ego, not your main persona as it is in the movie. So I think that's maybe one reason why that wasn't always used. The other is there's not that much magic in Second Life. Like, you can move things that would be too heavy to move in the real world, but they were very much against teleporting and flying initially. They were like, no, how do people get around in real? They ride horses, they drive cars, they walk. So they were much more, I forgot the term for it, skeuomorphic in terms of like trying to just recreate reality. Later on, they said, okay, we'll let you fly. Oh, flying's too slow. We'll let you teleport. Because people wanted it. People wanted those things. But I think it was very grounded in reality. Whereas The Matrix, the movies are all about, we can all be superheroes. If we simply understand that reality is fake, we can now break the rules of reality and fly and do all these things. So that's a little different, I think. The next reference that I found for it was actually a book. If I put my glasses on, I'll give you the title of it. It was in 99. Let's see, 97. There's a book called Spatial Computing that is much more on point. So again, before 2003, there was an academic publishing a book. I'll send you the link later, but I found it on Google Books by searching for spatial computing. So there's a book definitely in 97 that came out, and it covered a lot of the same topics. Everything before that is more of the GIS examples that I mentioned.
Who wrote that? Do you know that?
Let me open the link. I'll tell you. I don't have it open at the moment, but I will find it for you. Terry Caeli, Caelli, and Horst Bunke.
Cool. All right. Okay. And next step, you have been very important for the development of the HoloLens back then at Microsoft. Did they use the word spatial computing? Did they already talk about mixed reality, or was that a word which came later because of marketing?
I tried to push a bunch of better terms at Microsoft when I was there. It's a little bit of a weird history now. So I'll just let me encapsulate the history so you understand why my answer is this way. So I joined Microsoft actually to help them fix what you would call augmented reality today. So they were working on a project that after Second Life came out, Microsoft decided to build a thing that they internally called First Life. And it was essentially going to be a map of the world that you could walk around in as an avatar. So take the Earth and make it a virtual world that you can navigate. The problem was, and this is stuff that I had written about, that was a bad idea. At least at that year was a bad idea, because the geospatial information we had was so coarse that if you were to stand on a map at human scale, the aerial photography was so bad, or so low resolution anyway, that it would be a horrible experience. And you can see it today if you run Google Earth VR, but turn off the altitude limit so you can go really close to the ground, it starts to look really bad because the data is not there. We haven't collected, this was before Street View. This was before everybody's can upload their photographs to have a richer experience. So it was just satellites and aerial photography, and it's not good enough for that kind of experience. So I came there to help with that, and it turns out we canceled the project after 3 months because it wasn't going to be a great experience. The thing I think we could have done back in, this was 2008, was work on the back end, which today we'd call the AR cloud. Ori Inbar, you've had on the podcast, was one of the people who, I think he coined that term, AR cloud. But it's essentially what we were doing in 2008 was, let's build the back end infrastructure so that our mobile phones, our smartphones, can be more spatial. It doesn't have to be immersive AR, but they should know if I'm standing in a coffee shop to give me the menu for ordering. Like, that's a simple thing that would definitely be a form of spatial computing. Now, here's the problem at Microsoft. They tend to kill a lot of things, and a lot of the stuff at the time, this is before Satchik became CEO, a lot of it was based on power and who has the resources, and it was not very collaborative in the sense that maybe it is more today. So that project got cut. I moved around the company a couple of times, and then I finally got connected up with the few people in Xbox who had been working on the Kinect. And the story of how the HoloLens started, it was a fairly simple story. They had already started the Kinect. It hadn't shipped yet, but it was promising. Everybody was very interested, and games were being built for the Kinect at this time. And the theory of the Kinect was, let's get rid of the controller. Let's just use our hands and interact with just our bodies and our hands and not need any more controller. So the top of the company, Don Matrick, came to my boss and said, we're planning the next generation Xbox. And the team that was in charge of it kind of whiffed. They kind of gave us a really lame answer. They came back and told us, here's the answer. It's 10x better. And they're like, what? Of course it's 10x better. Like, tell us why. What's different? What's unique about it? So Don Matrick asked my boss, take your team that's currently working on the Kinect and go figure out what the next generation console should be. But come back with something that scares us, surprises us. Don't give us the everybody thinks the same way answer. Give us something totally out of the blue so that we could be thinking out of the box here. And so my boss asked us to do that exercise. And we looked at a bunch of things. I think everybody was going down the path of auto stereoscopic televisions. Like, we know we're going to make the first holodeck because we're going to have these 3D TVs. I'm like, that's not the holodeck yet, right? Just imagine being in a holodeck where everything is constrained to a 1 meter square. That's not the holodeck. So I don't think that was the right answer, but I said, kind of raised my hand. I was new on the team, and I said, what if we go ahead and do AR by putting glasses on your face? Now you can see imagery everywhere, right? Field of view wasn't thought of necessarily as the big limiter back then, but ideally we can put graphics everywhere. And there was a lot of pushback because, we just got rid of the controller. How are we going to put a device on your head? Nobody's going to want to add a device, and we're getting rid of devices. And so it took 6 months, but we finally convinced folks there that this was the only way to do it in 2010. This is the technology is the only thing close enough would be to do AR. We didn't want to do VR because of the social isolation. We wanted, Kinect was great for 4 people to play games together or 2 side by side. It was a social experience. And so we didn't want to lose the social part of it. So we said, we're going to do AR. We're going to make sure you can see the eyes of the person in the room with you who you're playing with. And so we started prototyping that. And I think it went wrong in a couple of places. I mean, I'm glad they came out with what they came out with. They solved a really hard problem, but it wasn't necessarily at least what I was hoping to do. I had always imagined the next generation Xbox doing all the graphics work. So the Xbox would be churning out the images, wirelessly sending those to your glasses, and the glasses would send the camera data back to the Xbox. So the Xbox would be like a little mini supercomputer in your room, but everybody would have a pair of glasses, and we'd have between 1, 2, 3, 4 people all in the same room doing experiences together. So that was the vision I was pushing. And the wireless people said, maybe we can't do that. It's too much bandwidth. The wireless technology is not good enough yet. So that got pushed back on, and nobody really wanted to have any wires for sure. We're not going to tether you while you're dancing around the room. We know why that doesn't work. So eventually the project got pushed out of the entertainment division, and it became more serious, and it became an all-in-one computer. So everything now has to fit on the head, the batteries, the computer, and that's a really hard problem. So that's why the HoloLens looks the way it looks, is they're solving a really hard problem of putting the entire computer on your head. It is a spatial computer. It's just that I was no longer on the team. I wasn't there to push those ideas. My boss was actually favoring calling this stuff not AR, calling it hallucination, which would have been way confusing today with AI hallucinations anyway. So he wanted to call this stuff hallucinations. I'm like, that sounds like drugs. It's not going to cut it. And ultimately, they first went with mixed reality as their explainer for what was happening. Oh, it's mixing reality. Okay, that makes sense. So you don't have to call it AR. We can call it MR. But it was still confusing, and most people didn't understand what it was good for. Like today, you see what it's good for. You see companies using it for on the field, even outdoor activities, because it's relatively safe to use. There's no wires to get tangled. You can see the real world pretty well in your peripheral vision. It doesn't block everything. So the HoloLens, and I'd say Magic Leap 2 are good examples of AR that actually just came along a little bit too slow to catch on, but they were good answers. But if you want to go consumer today, there's no consumer tech yet ready to do AR for visually anyway, for the masses. It's still too big. It's still too expensive. And so Apple's approach is the right one for today, to be using video pass-through. And so that's the reason you see that. It's the best technical approach today. But it doesn't mean in 15 years, everybody's going to be doing video see-through. I think there's still technologies that need breakthroughs. And one of those is AR displays need to get a bunch better. But then I think once they are, you'll see people shift back towards the optical see-through approach in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. And I guess that's also the case. And with Apple, they're trying to push, of course, a way smaller device. And I think the story is that the designers at Apple actually wanted to develop it way more. But Tim said, let's just publish the product because we need to go out in some way. And this will be the product right now, right?
I can't comment on all those articles. I've read all those articles, but I can't tell you what parts are true or which parts are false. I can say this. I think that almost every article that I read that was from insiders at Apple didn't have the right insiders. I think that the journalists, I'm not going to impugn their integrity. I think they're doing the best they can. But the people that they managed to get to talk are generally disgruntled employees. And I'm not a disgruntled employee, but I've been very careful about what I say to any journalist and what I say publicly. The people who have disclosed anything about the project are generally people who left under circumstances. And I'm not one of those. But I think that colors all the stories that you hear in a certain way. You hear about the arguments potentially if they're true. You hear about the failures potentially if they're true. But it doesn't mean they're true. It's just that's one person's perspective on things. And it doesn't mean that they even know everything that went on. So I do know a lot of went on because I was in the lucky position of reporting to the head of the project. Some journalists actually thought I was the head of the project for some reason, even just because I'd worked on the HoloLens previously to this. So there were a lot of stories that came up when I left in 2019 that said, the story said, the project's dead because Avi left. I'm like, I would be a terrible leader if my leaving caused the project to die. The good leaders make sure that there's a succession plan, that there's always somebody to take over and continue the work if you decide to go. And so I hope I'm a good leader. And whatever work I was doing, there were smart, capable people to take it over that could do just as good or better than me. My distinction is not that I'm better than everybody. It's just that I'm early. I get in their projects really early and have a big impact just because I'm so early, where there's only a few people to convince, right? That's the reason that I have been influential. It's not because I'm smarter than anybody else. It's because I'm luckier in that I get to go in the formative stages of the project and help prove or disprove ideas when everything is on the table. By the time other people join who are probably smarter than me, a lot of decisions have already been made. And so they may do a great job, but they may have less influence, right? But it's not, the skill that I bring is actually more so the imagination and the you might call it the vision, but it's not like anybody has a clear vision of the future. It's more like we have skill in figuring it out. There's a certain skill in terms of guessing the right answer and then validating it and then finding out if it's the right answer or not by testing it. It's not the same as Moses on the mountaintop coming out with the tablets and saying, this is what you must do. There's nobody I know who can do that, who has, even Johnny Ive, even Steve Jobs, they worked collaboratively. Their job was to hire and manage a bunch of really smart people who could together work out what the right answer is, and then they get to present it as a unified front. But the people working for them are the ones who really did all the hard work. And I'm just one of those people. I'm just one of the people who contributed, and many, many other disciplines contributed as well. But it's early enough so that the influence is sort of out proportion to anything else because you could go in a million different directions. Anyway, so I successfully have not answered your question about what actually happened at Apple, and I think it probably would take 10 years before people start talking about the specific details of how things went down and what decisions were made. I do know I was there in most of those meetings, but I wouldn't put a lot of stock in the articles based on where they come from.
Well, they write it because people read it, so everything they can get, they will write down, and that's the story of my life a little bit too. So I'm also a journalist and very happy when people tell me things. But that's actually a very good insight to understand more when you hear stories like this or that guy is leaving Microsoft. That happened last year, for example, or recently somebody left Google, who was an AR leader, and everybody was writing, okay, probably Google gives up on AR. Probably they don't. Who knows? Nobody knows. Nobody can tell anything. That's a general problem, of course. The last question concerning Apple and the spatial computing word. When you started that project, was it clear that you would do a spatial computing in a device, or was it also something you had to discuss? Because now spatial computing is Apple. That's pretty natural because everything is done, has been done before, and the discussion has been made. But when you joined Apple, was it already clear there was the personal computer, the mobile computer, and now there will be the spatial computer?
I'm trying to think of how I can answer that. I'll say this. I don't think we use the term spatial computing a lot. I think that was a good choice of a term that has a long legacy and is well understood. But I think there are all sorts of other code names for things. I think one of the things about working on a secret project is you tend not to call things by their real names ever. You come up with either the academic term or a code name for something. But what you don't want is, even at lunch, you're sitting and talking to somebody, and the person who the next table over is works for the same company, but they're not disclosed on your project. And so you want to use words that are gibberish, essentially. That they're not the right words. And Apple tends to use code letters and numbers a lot. So I don't think I should confirm what the code letters and numbers are either. They probably
don't do it, please. Yeah.
Don't want me to do that. But we talked about them in code, and so. But I think it's fair to say within the project, the goal was always to figure out a new product, one or more new products in a certain category. So the category that the product is in is the category that we intended to build for. It wasn't random. So you got to collect the right people to do that. And I think one of the reasons I was hired was because I have a track record of doing that. In whatever you want to call the space, that's the space I'm in. And if it had been anything else, I probably wouldn't have joined. Like, not that they told me when I interviewed what I would be doing, but I was very clear to them, here's what I do. If that's not what you're doing, don't hire me. I was like, I used almost those exact words, saying, here's what I like and here's what I want to do. Because I could have stayed at Amazon. I had a fine job at Amazon and it was no rush to leave. And interesting things were happening there. So the only reason that I'd be willing to jump ship was if I got to do the kind of thing that Apple has done. And so I asked them graciously, you don't have to tell me, but just don't hire me unless that's actually what you're doing.
Yeah, awesome. So now we have the new expression, spatial computing, and we have a lot of other expressions like metaverse, XR, mixed reality, and so on. And now there's the question. Of course, in the industry, we can talk about all those expressions and philosophize about them and think about what it actually means and stuff like that. But which word should we actually use concerning our customers or the end user? Is maybe spatial computing the first word we could actually take and towards the end users without any concerns? Like, metaverse was too big, was too spongy, to be honest. Is it spatial computing now?
I think so, but here's the test, right? And we're going to see this in the next 6 months. If the people whose job it is to create hype succeed in hyping up spatial computing so much that it becomes meaningless, then we're going to need to find yet another term. Apple has enough clout that when they say spatial computing, they're going to be clear about what they mean by it, and they're going to be clear about what is or isn't, hopefully, spatial computing. And so I think that's enough for that term to survive and mean something. In a way that I think Meta failed to do this with the metaverse. I think what Apple can do at this point, I think what they've already done from June till now is make a clear case for this is what spatial computing is. But that isn't going to stop everybody, because it's not trademarked. So it's not going to stop everybody from using that to describe whatever else they want to do. And we saw this with metaverse. Companies that were doing nothing related to the metaverse called themselves metaverse. And this year, companies that have no AI whatsoever are calling themselves AI companies. So I think you're going to see that. But the question is, to what extent? Can we hold the line and say this is what spatial computing is? Don't mess it up. Hopefully, yes. But it very clearly is not the same as the metaverse. I think that and I have given a couple of talks about that already. You can link to these if you want. That there's a clear distinction between the metaverse and spatial computing. And I'll try to summarize it like in a sentence if I can. The spatial computing might be multi-user. It might include, and it definitely does include, collaboration. But what it doesn't include is the entire world of people. Like, the internet includes all people connected to a computer, right? And connected to the internet. That's not everybody, but it's almost everybody, right? There are lots of places in the world that don't have internet, but presumably it's everybody who can afford it right now. The metaverse is more like the internet. The metaverse is essentially the network of what happens when everybody connects to a space, but it's now a 3D space and now a space with avatars and personas. That's the vision of the metaverse, is when everybody comes together into the giant mall of information. The spatial computing happens for one person. It happens maybe for 2 or 4 or 10, but there's no good reason for those 10 people to have to link to everything else out there. We don't want Zoom bombing of people coming into to our meeting of 10 people. We don't want random people showing up, coming through the door saying, this door was connected to my space, so I just walked in. Like the best example that I could give you to try to make that concrete is, let's say you and I met at the top of the Eiffel Tower, right? In the metaverse, there would be one Eiffel Tower, And anybody who wanted to go there virtually would go there. And it would have some reflection of the real Eiffel Tower, most likely. Maybe there'd be some cameras on the real Eiffel Tower that could show you what the weather was actually like at the Eiffel Tower. But in any event, there'd be lots of people coming in and out, just like in reality, random strangers. That's not a great place for a meeting if you want to have a private conversation, because everybody can hear you. That's up there. The spatial computing version of the Eiffel Tower is we push a button and we get a copy of the Eiffel Tower that you and I can meet in and know there's no other humans there to eavesdrop on us. Maybe the AI is helping us, or the AI is listening, but that needs to be private. But we might create non-player characters. We might create NPCs who walk around and make the place look busy, but they're just window dressing. They're not there representing real people. They're just there to make the place feel empty if we so desire the place to feel not empty, but we could also have it be empty. So we get our own Eiffel Tower in spatial computing, but we have to go to the metaverse to get to the shared one. That to me is the key difference. And the biggest problem with the metaverse today is that it's not safe. Safety is number one. Some of the devices are not yet safe for kids to use. I wouldn't be putting a Quest 2 or Quest 3 on someone 10 years old. Honestly, they lowered the age, but I think 13 is still iffy. The way I put it is, if your child is still asking you to look for monsters, to close the closet door or look under the bed for monsters, they're too young for most VR experiences, at least unchaperoned, because VR feels real. The monsters in VR feel real, and you can be emotionally hurt in VR, even if not physically, if you're not able to process what's going on. And even adults can be emotionally hurt in VR by someone who's incredibly malicious. We have lots of examples of that. Spatial computing doesn't have that, because you're going to get into a session with people you know, people you trust, people you care about, coworkers, right? The worst case you're going to have is you have a meeting with 10 people in spatial computing and one of them is an asshole, like can happen inside of any company. That's the worst case that you're going to have, right? Really, in spatial computing, because you're going to know who people are. We're accountable. So that's the biggest difference between the metaverse. The metaverse so far is lacking in accountability and safety, whereas spatial computing is there because it's a small group that of people who know each other, just like Zoom.
And maybe spatial computing is needed to actually build a metaverse we will all want to have in the future. Yeah. I always try to explain that with what Apple is doing with spatial computing makes the metaverse more real, makes it more happening actually. And I don't know why you actually did it, but maybe you can answer it now. When the metaverse was at full spike, full wave, you founded the XR Guild. Why did you do that, and what is it about?
Yeah, so I think had I known that AI was going to take over within a year, I might have not called it the XR Guild, because I think a lot of people today feel like, oh, AI is the thing that's scary or exploitive in a lot of ways, right? But XR includes AI. Like XR is not all of AI. Like there are things in AI that are not XR. So the Venn diagram is not 100%. But all the things that are scary about AI are relevant to XR. So we started the XR Guild because there are all these threats out there. There are things that people have already done, like making virtual worlds that are not safe enough for kids. People have already built them. They've already deployed them. We've seen them for 30 years already. Right? These are not new, but people keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. They're like, oh, well, we'll just make a social bubble, or, oh, we'll just do this to solve this problem. And none of them are looking at the history of what the solutions have already been tried. And in many cases, we know what works and doesn't work, but we're making the same mistakes over and over again. So we started the XR Guild in order to try to help everybody in the industry have more information so that they can make more ethical decisions. The core belief is that they want to make more ethical decisions, that there are very few people out there who are like greedy and exploitive and go, haha, how can I trick people? Most of us just want to make great products, but what we fall down is we don't have enough information about what is a safe product to be able to make the good decisions. So what we want to do is we want to help the professionals in the field by collecting and providing information and mentorship in order to help everybody in their own job to do a better job. And it's all voluntary. They have to want it. We're not forcing this on anybody. But if people like this kind of idea, then we're going to hopefully make up for the fact that this is not taught in schools well. It's starting to be taught again. But if you were educated as a lawyer, you got ethics training. If you were educated as a doctor, you got ethics training. If you came up in computer science, what I did, none. No ethics training whatsoever. And it shows. It shows with some of the really dumb things that AI experts will say in terms of, wait, this is the way humans learn. Humans read a book and then they can reproduce the content. So why would computers be any different when they learn from the same materials that humans learn from? And I have to sit there and go, do we have to really explain this to you ethically? Ethically, humans pay for that book. Somebody paid for a copy of that book and the author of the book made some money so that you can learn. And now you're saying we don't owe you anything? No, that's not how it works. You got to make sure that creators create. They have to be compensated for creations or else they'll stop creating. They'll go and move on to a different job if they don't make money. And so that you can't just scrape everything and assume it's free. That kind of thinking is why we started the XR Guild, because that's not the only issue. There's plenty of XR specific issues like how can you be exploitive socially in a metaverse situation? What are the harms that can happen? There's plenty of those that people don't understand well enough that we need to go raise awareness of. And we're not the only ones, but we're, I think, the only membership org that works like that. There are other membership orgs that are less focused on ethics. They're just focused on social or information. And there's other advocacy groups that are fighting to have better regulations, right? There's all that thing exists, but we started this because we didn't see a group that was willing to take on the hard challenges of helping to educate people. That's changing. So I'm part of the Virtual World Society today, and that their mission is changing a little bit to take on more ethics as well. And I'm helping them with that. So there's an overlap now. But at the time we started it, we were the only ones that were talking this way. And a lot of people said, yeah, that has to exist. We need that. And if we're successful, I don't think anybody will know the XR Guild in 10 years, but if we're successful, we'll have the equivalent of a Hippocratic Oath and some body, some organization that is in charge of ethics for the field, that is the place you go to appeal when somebody says this company is not behaving ethically. Then there's a place to go. In the same way that if a law firm was behaving unethically, you'd have a bar to go talk to. Like that'll happen, whether it's us or someone else. So we're trying to kind of kickstart that process by just educating everybody as to why it matters. Why should you be ethical, and what are you missing out on if you're not? Turns out, if you don't put ethics into your process, you make crappy products. So if anybody wants to be successful, they need to understand ethics in order to make a product that their customers will actually like. If you ignore that and say move fast and break things, you are going to move fast and break things, and people are not going to be happy about the things that got broken.
Yeah. Sounds like everybody who's developing digital products should be part of the XR Guild or something similar. When they want to join the XR Guild, where can they find it?
It is on the web at xrguild.org. It is a nonprofit. It is a US-based charity. So actually, joining it is going to be great because we get the benefits of a nonprofit. We can pass on some discounts to other people. And we're also very democratically run. So we have elections and everybody votes on what our principles are. The only criteria for getting into the guild is that you agree with the principles that we publish. But once you're in, you can actually vote to change the principles if you want as well. And we just try to be very democratic as just representing everybody in the field. The thing that's been holding us back the most is that it's all volunteer based. So it's based on how much time we have. And I've probably put in the most time, but that's still limited time. I have other things I have to do as well. And so we'd like to do, hopefully, is raise more money so we can pay people to do some of the work that volunteers don't want to do, like maintaining a website, right? That's real work. But it'd be nice to be able to pay people for that. So we're a very low budget nonprofit at the moment. But the easiest thing for us to do is grow in membership. We can add thousands of members very, very easily, and it's very low impact because as of today, there's no dues. Donations are voluntary, and we ask you to volunteer, but we try to keep it very low impact.
Awesome. I guess we're coming to an end of this conversation. We have learned a lot about spatial computing, and thank you very much, Avi Bar-Zeev, that you took us with you in your history and about all your experiences you have been made in this industry. Thank you very much for joining Spatial Realities.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.